Hello, welcome to my home and to this installment of Prepped and Packed. I decided to make you a video to show you some of the benefits of freezing your tofu and also make one of my favorite dishes, miso mushrooms with tofu over rice. This is one of my favorite dishes to make for me and my husband Kenny, and I hope you'll like it too. So where does the prepped part come into play here? Well, the first is that I've taken my tofu. This is extra firm tofu. I got this brand because it's 16 ounces, and I found that most tofu now comes in 14 ounces, which seems cheap. So I take this, and as soon as I get home, I just throw it in the freezer. Like, I literally take it, and I throw it in my freezer and hope it doesn't fall out, and then I wait. Once it's frozen completely, usually in 24 hours, I then just have to take it out a little bit before, like 1 or 2 days or shorter time if you're going to leave it on the counter. You want to make your dish. And there are real benefits to freezing your tofu. First, freezing your tofu changes the texture of it. So I'll show you this in a second. But normally when you get tofu, if you want it to get crispy, which you do most of the time unless you're using it to make some sort of like silken chocolate pie or smoothie, you're going to want to press your tofu. And this can get very complicated very quickly. So what most recipes will have you do is make up some sort of contraption like this. Now, the tofu would hypothetically not still be in its plastic container, but I'm not taking it out yet. What they want you to do is put a towel under a plate, put the tofu on the towel, put the plate on top of the tofu, and then weight it down with some sort of weight. They oftentimes suggest canned food because canned food is heavy. I hate this. I hate this for a couple of reasons. The first is that this is not stable. Very often I've done this before I knew about this other way of cooking tofu. And it falls off halfway through. I've never broken a plate, but the can has fallen off, and that's not great. Also, you get a lot of the water out, but you don't get all the water out, and it's sort of like trying to get it crispy, sort of like trying to fry a wet washcloth. So instead, what I do is I freeze it. And when I freeze it, something magical happens. I do not know the science behind this, and I have not been able to find it anywhere on the internet. But basically, the texture, which is, again, very much like a wet washcloth, becomes closer to something like a sponge. You know how if you want to wring out the moisture out of a washcloth, you really have to crank that, use some leverage? Well, with a sponge, all you have to do is squeeze, and that's exactly what's going to happen with our tofu. What you can do here is to make your rice ahead of time. Now, you want to be careful with this because rice can dry out when it gets old, but I made this earlier today. I could have made it last night, and in this sealed jar, it should still be in pretty good shape. So, what I've done is I've just cut the top off of the plastic, and I've drained the water from the tofu out. So now I'm going to show you what it looks like when you squeeze this. So you're going to want to do this gently because it is still a rectangle, a box shape, and if you squeeze it too much, it's just going to crumble. But you can be pretty aggressive. So this is what we're going to do. Block of tofu. Now watch how much water comes out of this. That took, what, two seconds? Do it a little bit on the other side. Great, and that's about as much water as we can get out right now without breaking it up too much. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of tofu and I'm going to cut it into 3 or 4 slabs is the word I use. Just take your knife, chef's knife, honed if possible. That doesn't really matter. Honed knives are just better. And that's 1. And that's 2. Or, well, 2 cuts, 3 pieces. You understand how math works. So now that I have my tofu cut, I'm just going to squeeze the rest of that water out. So I have a clean dish towel right here. I'm going to take one of my pieces of tofu, fold it in there, and it's thin enough now that it shouldn't really break up, so you can be pretty aggressive here. And now, I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the camera, a bunch more liquid has left and exited onto the towel. So I'm just going to do this for the other 2. You can see the texture of this is different than if you were normally cooking with tofu. It's a lot spongier, there's a lot more holes, and that's because we froze it. It, physically changed. So now I've just put a slick of oil on here. on this pan. What I'm going to do is turn each one of these pieces over in the oil and make sure it's coated. And this is what's going to get us really crispy tofu. Now, I just want to point out that you can absolutely pan fry this at this point, and I think that this is one of the big advantages to doing it this way as opposed to doing it with pressing it. Because with pressing it, you almost certainly have to bake it in order to get it crispy. It's just not going to crisp up in a pan. It's going to steam. It's not going to fry. But I am going to be baking it because I found that I can get very similar results without having to tend to it, and then I have my pan free for my mushrooms. My oven set for about 350. My oven thermometer is not accurate, so I always have to set it lower than what I actually need. I'm just going to take this pan, stick her in there, and then set the timer. I'm going to start with 10 minutes. So to cook our mushrooms, I've done this dry and I've done it with oil, and I've decided I like it with oil a little bit better. I just have a slick of oil in here. I think that's a piece of parsley from my lunch, so whatever. And I'm just going to throw in these mushrooms. Normally I don't buy my mushrooms pre-cut, but that's just what happened this week. You just want them sliced. And then we're going to let these saute for a while and start to get brown, stirring every so often. And we're also going to get our sauce ready. So I'm going to share with you guys a tip. Mincing garlic is annoying. Normally I have fresh ginger in this, but I don't have any, so we're going to use powdered. But something that I use with ginger is I grate it. So when I'm making this dish, normally I have this little small grater, and I just grate it like this. It gets it really fine. And then hypothetically, you can just grate the ginger on here too, and that helps you from having to scrape that weird brown skin off or anything. It doesn't get too many fibrous bits. You can just do this and then put it right in. Whoo boy, you can hear that sizzle. So I'm just going to take my knife, get that ginger off, or that garlic off, and then take some ground ginger and just sprinkle some of that on top. So what I have here are two different kinds of miso. Normally I just use like a white mellow miso, but my friend Aram just gave me this Korean miso, is what she called it. If you're somebody who speaks Korean, and this is not what that is, I'm going off my friend Aram's description of what it is. This is spicy though, so I'm not going to use as much. So I'm just going to take about 2 or 3 tablespoons of this and maybe a tablespoon of this and put it into a measuring cup with some hot water. So now that we have those in our hot water, I'm going to take some sesame oil, just a little bit, and just dab some of that in here. So the reason I have this in hot water is because miso's really thick. It's a quite thick paste, and so having it in hot water makes it easier to dissolve, and then it'll incorporate more easily once I'm adding it to our mushrooms and creating a sauce. So our tofu just buzzed. So you can see it's already starting to get a bit of a good golden color, but we're just gonna flip it over. And this is still pretty soft, so I'm gonna let this continue to cook for about another 15 minutes on the other side. So our mushrooms have cooked just about where I want them. So I'm gonna take our sauce, which is looking delicious. I'm just gonna pour that in and stir it up. Still cooking, but this is pretty much done. A lot of it's evaporated, it's getting thick, so I'm just going to cut the heat, and then as you can see, burner no longer on, because that's how that works. And we're just going to let this sort of cool a little bit and finish cooking just in the residual heat from the pan. So while these things are finishing up, and before my small child and adult husband get home, let's talk about toppings. Now today I'm just going to do this very simply. It's just going to be the mushrooms and the tofu and some sesame seeds. However, on days that I'm more prepared, I like to chop up some fresh cilantro or scallions. That adds a really great fresh bite. And I also like adding in sliced avocado. Up, and look who's here. D-A-O-A. My son's spelling for us. So I have this almost done. We're just waiting for the tofu. So I've just taken the rice, layered the mushrooms on top, and This is how I'll just pack it up tomorrow. So I'll just put a lid on that and we're good to go. And then when I rewarm it up, I'll put it in for about a minute 30. It doesn't need to be like piping hot to be good. You just kind of want to warm it through.
Not sure.
Okay, so now as you can see, it's very golden brown. It's nice and crispy. Still has some give, but it's not soggy. So we're gonna cut this up and sprinkle some soy sauce on it. So I've cut this up into little squares, and now I'm just gonna sprinkle some soy sauce over. You just kind of want to get like a little bit on each piece and not miss. Maybe watch instead of through your phone with your own eyes. And now we're just gonna add a sprinkling of sesame seeds. And we're done, that's it. And that's how you make my mushroom and tofu with miso sauce rice bowl. I hope you guys like it. And I hope you guys stay prepped and packed all next week.